former auditor general, he goes back a ways. Former representative for the 95th Legislative District. He's a former York County Democratic chairman. He's a dad. He's a husband. He's an all-around swell guy. He's a professor. He's like a professor now. Good morning, Eugene. How you doing?
That may be the coolest title of all of them, though, is the professor. It's not a bad title.
Yeah, the professor. Now, are you a full-fledged professor? Are you an associate? What? Where you at?
Adjunct professor.
Adjunct. So you don't teach junk, you just adjunct as in Junct, right? So
100% true, absolutely.
Anyway, welcome in this morning. And I know you're a sports fan. You're also a runner. A lot of people don't know how big a runner you are. You run long distances, man. I mean, talk about that.
I am signed up, so I've done two of them so far. My third Ironman 70.3 this July. That you start off with about a 1.5 mile swim, then you bike 56 miles, then you run a half marathon, and I've run several marathons separate of that as well.
That is sick. I mean, that is a really sick thing. I've seen these Ironman people. You know, anybody that ever takes drugs, you don't need to take drugs. Just go do one of these Ironman things, and it substitutes for any high that you might have. Whatever got you into that? I mean, that is crazy.
So it's kind of funny because anytime, whether my kids go or some family members say, hey, I want to see this thing, and I say, okay, but just so you know that you think I'm crazy, you're about to be 2,000 other deranged lunatic human beings.
Wow.
And they go, wow. And then they spend like 5-10 minutes talking, and they're like, oh, I thought it was just you. These people are all crazy. I said, yeah, it's a society of crazy people.
Thought it just was you, Dad, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. One thing leads to another. I started doing these Spartan races and looked for another challenge and signed up for an Ironman. I figured, my daughter swam in high school. That can't be that bad. So
right.
25 meters, wanted to shoot myself. And then I figured I better get good at this if they're going to dump me in the middle of the open water and I got to swim a couple miles.
Yeah, great. And then you get out there and the sharks are after you or something like that. Then that's really bad. But you remember what happened with the guy at the marathon race? You know, he ran the marathon and he died after he gave the news. I mean, come on. This is nuts. But
that may be bad, but if you are not out swimming a shark, to spoiler alert.
Okay, very nice.
The shark is undefeated.
No, the shark, yeah. See, I've always been a great believer that when you go into the ocean, you're on the visiting team to start out with. You're minus 10 on the point spread, so it's not good.
It is not a neutral site.
No, it's not. No, you go in there and that's it. And it's not your home. I mean, you're invading. So there you go. Anyway, are you an Eagles fan? Were you happy about this weekend?
My daughter is a Temple student. She graduates in May, so even though I'm a Steeler guy, in honor of her, I rooted for the Eagles, and certainly I think we were all getting tired of the Chiefs.
And you kept peace within the family, most importantly. That's what you really needed to do there. So anyway,
exactly right.
So government it's been an interesting 3.5 or so weeks so far in what we're looking at with government. And I was talking with Charlie Giroux this morning. He was saying, I'm a little uncomfortable with the whole executive power thing. I think some of us are. I'm a former history teacher for 25 years. I always talked about the powers of checks and balances and separation of powers. So we're seeing a president here who's saying, okay, I'm going to push the outer limits of the executive authority. A lot of people are saying Congress didn't do their job. They abrogated it. But nowhere in our Constitution does it say that one branch has the right to take over another branch's powers if they do a bad job at that. So where do we sit on this right now? You're a professor on this kind of stuff. How do you separate this all out at the moment?
I think we are at the stage, first of all, where Trump is basically taking advantage for how frustrated the public is for a lack of progress in so many areas I'm going to say the last decade. Maybe
great statement, great statement.
So he's taking advantage of that politically. And he's doing things he wants to do and things that he ran on. Having said that, I always tell people, whether it's your side or not, be very cautious about one side having too much power.
Yeah.
Even if they control the Congress, whatever. I mean, you never want one person doing this. So this isn't about being an anti-Trump statement. It's just our system is based on it's tough to get anything done. Now, that does not mean Congress gets a pass.
Right.
Both parties have failed over the last 10 to 20 years in Congress. Even when Obama was in, they didn't do a good job of negotiating with him.
Have they ever?
They're supposed to negotiate. It's supposed to be hard. So I'm very uncomfortable with all these executive orders, even some of the ones I may agree with, but that's not how the system's supposed to work.
Trump said something yesterday that I thought, and I've posited that that's where he was, but he actually came out and said it. I think it was yesterday or the day before.
Yeah.
And he said, first time I was a president, I didn't understand that whole system. He said there were a lot of things. He said I hired people from the inside. I had a lot of turnover. He said I didn't really understand the whole political system, but I do now. And it's interesting when he said that because he obviously does understand what he wants to do this time, whereas the first time he was kind of bumbling around. I think he thought that it was just kind of part of the whole private sector, and you knock it over like you do other businesses, and you have the art of the deal and all that. That was not the case. This time around, he does have an understanding, I think, whether you like it or not, where he wants to go with this whole thing, right?
I think he really learned the power of the presidency after he lost to Biden, but before he left office.
I agree with you.
That 2-month period. I think that's where he started actually learning about the job. And you're right. When he was with the Trump organization, the people that worked for him were trying to help him succeed. He probably was not accustomed to, and look, all presidents have had to deal with this, was trying to move that federal bureaucracy. There's the joke during, when Eisenhower won and Truman's president, and he's sitting there laughing with his secretary, and she goes, "What's so funny?" He goes, "Poor Reich. He used to be in a military general, ordering people to do this and that, and there's nothing going to happen." I mean, it's part of the joke that even Truman was frustrated with the bureaucracy, but Trump, I think, learned that now, and actually the 4 years off, I think probably made him better prepared to take over this time.
Yeah, I think you're right, and he put people in who were these so-called disruptors now, who are doing exactly that. They're getting in, and even if they were part of the government before, like a Marco Rubio, he's become a disruptor along with Trump, and it's hard to remember when he used to call him Little Marco, and now here he is on his side as the Secretary of State. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up that's new, that I haven't heard anybody talk about, I think Donald Trump is maybe the greatest political conversation starter of anybody ever. And I'm not saying it's always necessarily in a good place for people, but he's a great a political conversation starter. He does it almost every day, doesn't he?
Look, Gary, since he has burst onto the scene, again, I think he is, being much more focused this time around than the first time around, where I basically thought he was a reality show TV president and the staff would just do what they wanted to do.
Right.
That's not happening this time around. I think he is in charge to as much as any president has been. But he does suck all the oxygen out of the room. I don't know what it is about the guy. I mean, look, I'm going to tell you, I'm not a big fan of all this stuff. There's some things I do agree with, most I disagree. We've always been honest about that.
Sure.
But when it comes to the performance of the job and commanding attention, he has figured out how to do that.
Yeah, he does. And he is one of a kind. I say it every day. He's dinner and a show every day because you go in there and it dominates the scene. I was amazed last week.
Gary, he took over the Kennedy Center. I'm sorry, and he made himself the chairman. I'm sitting around laughing, going, "This is ridiculous."
Yeah.
And then when he said, he goes, "Well," they asked him, "Why'd you do this?" Because all the shows stunk.
Yeah.
And then they asked him, "Well, which shows did you see?" He goes, "I didn't see any of them."
Right.
And I'm like, how
only he can do that. Only he can do that.
Pull that off.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, it's almost like a bigger than life thing. It's almost like a cartoon.
Right.
Where you say, okay, if anybody else tried to do this, people would go nuts. When he tries to do it, they say, "Oh, it's just Donald Trump." And
I tell friend and foe alike when it comes to that, because Gary, your point, sorry to interrupt, is that I think his real training ground on this was he was a New York real estate developer who wanted to get on the crazy newspaper stories. That, and he was through The Apprentice basically a TV star for 10 years.
Yeah.
I think that trained him to how to do this. I'm just being blunt about that.
Well, every president has a role to play, I think, and we've been very fortunate in our history to have presidents step into the breach. I always called Ronald Reagan the grandfather president because he'd sit the country up on his knee and then say it's going to be okay. You got Donald Trump, who I might, if I were to give him a name, it would be the tabloid president because it's the tabloid headlines every day, which was famous for New York, for the newspapers. But, it's interesting. I watched Benjamin Netanyahu last week. I was fascinated when he came to Washington, and he's in the room there, and Trump starts talking about this whole Gaza thing, and he says, "This place is a rubble. Let's go build it up, and we'll make it the Riviera of the Middle East. Let's send them out for a while, bring them back, and they could live in something better." And you watch Netanyahu in the same room, and Netanyahu, you almost think is ready to roll his eyes. And afterward, they ask him the question. They said, hey, what do you think of that? And Netanyahu says, when this guy, Trump, when he talks, he said, you tend to drop your jaw a lot. And he said, but then he's the guy, 5 minutes later, you say, well, it's a new conversation. It's a different idea than anybody else has talked about. And in the case of Gaza, it was different than any other president has talked about. Again, is it crazy? I don't know if it's crazy. Maybe there's something in the middle, but he started the conversation on it again by putting a different idea out there. Talk about that for a second.
One thing I've said, and look, there's a lot of things about President Obama I like, and I've voted for him twice. I think he was a good person, and I was proud he was my president. But I always said this: he paid a horrible price for always starting out at the reasonable position. And what I mean by that is, like, when he was trying to do something in the Middle East, he'd start out so you look at his position and go, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But the other side viewed that as the starting point of the negotiation. And then you're left to work back from there. When he would start out with his budget, like, oh, that's reasonable. What I think Trump comes in and says, like, everyone that knows him privately says he's not always like this privately. Like,
right.
He is charming, and you can actually have a regular conversation with him. He's not just sitting there yelling about stuff all the time. I think his strategy is, if I'm going to get to the reasonable position, I've got to start out crazy. I think that's what. Now, obviously, and when it comes to international relations in Gaza, there's a whole million other factors.
Much more nuanced, yeah.
Right, but I do think that that's his strategy going into this: is say something so outlandish so that I have room to negotiate to get back.
Yeah.
That does not always work that way, but I think that's how he thinks.
Obviously, his whole life has been like that. Interesting conversation this morning. The conversation will continue again next week, Eugene. Thanks for joining us, as always, my friend. Great to have you in.
You got it, Gary. Have a good one. Survive that weather out there.
You got it, buddy. Take care and get a good run and a swim in today. There out in the nice cold weather. Ugh, jeez, and a bike ride
too. Pool now, my man.
I got you. Yeah, Eugene DePasquale with us here on WSBA. When we come back, what about your computer? You interested in what goes on in the computer world a little bit? Well, Walt Oakham is, and he's the very best at it. Your computer repair. He'll join us here on WOYK.